Hope, help, and healing. With a hint of humor, Hashimoto'sHealing.com.
Welcome back, people. We are visiting with Dana Trentini of Hypothyroidmom and discussing issues around pregnancy, Hashimoto's, and hypothyroidism. You know, there are really two sides of this discussion. On the one hand, there's the fact that so often pregnancy is a factor in the onset of Hashimoto's and hypothyroidism. So let's talk a little bit about that, Dana. Why is that?
That's a good question, Mark. I think there are the 3 P's of when a woman is particularly vulnerable to develop hypothyroidism, including Hashimoto's. The 3 P's are puberty, pregnancy, and perimenopause. And if you think about that, it makes sense, right? Because our sex hormones and our thyroid hormones and our adrenals are all intricately connected. So in a woman's life, you know, during those times when our sex hormones are fluctuating in those periods of time, we are more vulnerable to develop thyroid problems. And what's interesting about that is, even though my symptoms and my diagnosis came after my first son was born, really when I look back at my life, I can see symptoms from when I was a baby. I mean, to the point where my mom describing me as, you know, a 2-year-old, you can hear, you know, the constipation, the eczema, the dry skin. I mean, you can, if you look at it, it started, and then at puberty it got worse, and then finally pregnancy just kind of accelerated it, and each pregnancy it accelerated further and further. But it makes sense, right? Our sex hormones and our thyroid hormones are so intricately connected that it would make sense that that would be the case. The sad part is postpartum. I don't think women are doctors are thinking about thyroid postpartum, right? A lot of us are told that we have postpartum depression when we come in with these symptoms, which happened to me. My doctor said, there is something called postpartum depression, and that could explain what's happening to you. And I just looked at her and I said, I'm not depressed. Right. You know, something is happening to me. My cholesterol shot through the roof. My blood sugar rose. My kidney stones developed. I mean, wait a second. My whole body was revolting. And so I think it's really important postpartum for women to be watched. As I think it's a time when women are particularly vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, it's so often... it seems to be when people look back in their history, and this was true of myself also with my Hashimoto's, is that, you know, when I reflect back, I've had these symptoms for a really long time. You know, and with men it's a little more rare, so, you know, I can say something in defense of doctors, but with women it's far more common, and it's something that should be checked on a regular basis.
Absolutely, absolutely. What's interesting, I should share with you, Mark, you know, I've had my thyroid antibodies tested several times over the course of my diagnosis, and every time they're negative. So, you know, each time I've thought, okay, I don't have Hashimoto's, but, you know, there's something inside me, because when I go gluten-free, it works great. Oh, you know, I have the selenium deficiency. I have all the classic signs of Hashimoto's, and yet my antibodies are always coming back negative. So I'm right now at the point of going for an ultrasound. I want to take it a little bit further because I'm curious about what is the source of my hypothyroidism. And given that Hashimoto's is the #1 cause in the United States, I can't help but wonder if it's there and my antibodies are just showing up negative.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important to realize, just, you know, in working with a lot of Hashimoto's people, first of all, I think there's a lot of kind of over-reliance on testing, and there's so many reasons why testing may not be reliable, whether it's testing antibodies or testing TSH or T3, T4 levels. There's so many things that can interfere with that. So it's hugely important to trust your instincts and to trust, you know, I say this all the time, but it's really true. The symptoms and the way you feel is clinically significant and important with Hashimoto's.
Absolutely.
There's no question about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so another thing I just wanted to talk about was the genetic component. You kind of touched on that as maybe as a child you had the early signs of this. Like, there really is a genetic component for Hashimoto's in many families. We seem to see clusters.
Yes.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure, sure. Well, I'm a classic example of genetics because my mother and my brother both have hypothyroidism also. My father passed away of lung cancer, and he was not a smoker. And, we joked about my dad was able to fall asleep sitting upright, and most of the time my dad was asleep. So, my dad's not alive for him to go and get tested, so I don't know if he had it also, but my mother and my brother have it also. So there's absolutely a genetic component to it. And, a lot of my readers will say, oh, but I don't have any family members with it. Well, Mark, you and I, we all know that the TSH is the test that's given, and it's so faulty in diagnosing so many people. So there could be family members that have it, and they have absolutely no idea.
Right. And that's the fact. I mean, it's so often not looked for or tested for that, I mean, I would not be surprised if a lot of people have it somewhere in their family. It was just no one ever looked for it.
Exactly. And the only reason my brother and my mother were tested was because I was tested. So they had all these symptoms, but their doctor never thought, oh, well, let's test their thyroid. Especially with my brother, was a young man, and why would you test him? But it turned out that he has it also. So what's interesting about genetics, which is another question I get a lot from readers, is you can be genetically predisposed to a condition, whether it's autoimmune, hypothyroidism. I'm sure there are many genes that play a role in developing these diseases, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're destined to have this, right? Your environment can trigger whether those genes turn on or not. And what's interesting is, if you think about it, you can be predisposed, and then a life event happens and it triggers it. So in my case, pregnancy just like cranked it, right? Like, for my brother, he went through a very stressful period at work, and he all of a sudden, it just triggered, so you could go through life and you say, but my children don't have any symptoms, everything is fine. But I encourage you to continue watching your children through to adulthood, let them know what the symptoms are, so that if later in their life they should happen to develop it, they know what they're looking for, and they know what tests that they should have done.
Right, I think it's a great point. It's really true. I think there are multiple factors that lead to the onset. We know some viruses are involved. We know stress is a huge issue. I think that's what happened to me too. It was a major stressful period. And to cause the expression, and I think time and time again we see that. But you're absolutely right. It's your genes are not necessarily your destiny. It's you have control of your destiny, and the decisions you make that cause the expression of the gene, the dietary, lifestyle, what have you, exposures. Those are the things that dictate the ultimate direction in which your genetic profile leads.
Absolutely. So I watch my children very carefully. I make those dietary changes, and I'm watching their nutrient levels, and so I think that they may have inherited this from me, possibly, and I'd like to do whatever I can. I even think about, I do as much as possible with gluten-free with my older son in particular, who has some symptoms, and so I'm being proactive. Their tests show fine, but that's okay, but I don't want one day for them to be vulnerable, and so I've made changes to their lifestyle, just to help them.
Right, I think real prevention, this is my children too, real prevention is really about behaving as though they already have it. Rather than waiting for something to be expressed.
So they have it,
So that's the real way to prevent it. Okay, so another thing I want to switch gears a little bit, because I wanted to really talk about the other side of this. We've got a lot of questions, great questions from my Facebook support group. And, the other side of this, of course, is really what led you to start the blog. And that's the fact that Hashimoto's and hypothyroidism, it really can be a major challenge, firstly, to get pregnant for some women, and then for others to successfully carry the baby to term. And, you went through it, and I have worked with people who've gone through it. It's devastating to go through that. So what do you think is responsible for the challenges? Why is it so difficult to have a successful pregnancy?
Boy, I think there are so many factors. I think the number one thing is that the baby, it takes several months of gestation for them to develop their thyroid gland, to develop the production of T4 and T3 hormones and TSH.
Right.
So it said the first 12 weeks they are completely dependent on the mother for maternal thyroid hormone. Now, I've read in Wikipedia that the TSH in the production of T4 doesn't even happen until 18-20 weeks of gestation. So we could technically say that they're dependent on their mother for many months in the early gestation. So in order for them to grow and develop properly, Mark, they're relying on the mother's thyroid hormone. Well, if I have low thyroid hormone, it's possible I'm going to have trouble producing enough for my child.
Right.
And so I think that the lack of testing of women is a very big issue, and so a lot of women don't know they have low thyroid hormone, and they're conceiving, and then they're miscarrying, and they're suffering infertility. I mean, if you think about the millions of dollars that are being spent on infertility treatments. Now, listen, I was on the road to IVF. I was 40, and I miscarried, and I thought, I'm going to schedule an appointment with a reproductive endocrinologist. I'm going to, if it doesn't happen within a certain number of months, this is what I'm going to do. I think IVF is a great option for those that, need it to have their babies. So This is not knocking IVF. But what I think is really important is that in that process, what about thyroid testing? What testing is being done? And if it is being done, is it just TSH? Are antibodies, are thyroid antibodies being tested? Are free T4 and free T3 and reverse T3 being tested? My gut tells me no. So all these people going through IVF treatments, I wonder if they had thyroid testing, if that would be a way to help them. Also, our ovaries are very sensitive to thyroid hormone levels. So we can have anovulation, no ovulation because of low thyroid. Right. So it affects our progesterone levels and our estrogen levels. So you see, there's so many different possible factors. The other thing I think about too, Mark, is when you have one autoimmune condition, you're more vulnerable to develop others. Exactly. So if you have Hashimoto's, what stops your immune system from attacking reproductive tissue, including fetus tissue? And so one thing I would recommend if women with Hashimoto's are struggling with infertility and repeated miscarriage is, what about having the immunological fertility testing? So there are certain antibodies that they can test, such as antiphospholipid antibodies, natural killer cells, and anti-nuclear antibodies. And these are antibodies targeted toward reproductive tissue and the fetus. So you see, there's so many different things that could be going on as a result of low thyroid that would impact fertility and pregnancy. In my case, my issue was that my TSH was spiking very fast. In order to meet the needs of my child, my TSH was rapidly rising, but my doctors didn't know. The American Thyroid Association recommends a TSH less than 2.5 in the first trimester. Mine was reaching 8.6, wow. And they thought it was okay. Yeah. So, there's so, you could get me started on this.
Don't get me started. No, I know, you're right. I mean, it's a thing. When you really look at the influence of the thyroid on the physiology, it's like there's like no stone that you can turn over that doesn't have thyroid, receptors. It's like crazy. Everything in the body does, and you're absolutely right. The reproductive organs, because they're part of the endocrine system, are hugely influenced by thyroid hormone. Oh, that was great. So we're going to finish up this little section, and then we're going to take questions from the Facebook group. But I think it bears repeating because it's such great information. Let's recap again. What are some of the keys for a successful pregnancy?
If I had to name them, I would say there are 4. Okay. So the first is you need to be as thyroid healthy as possible before trying to conceive. What does that mean? The testing should include free T4, free T3, reverse T3, thyroid peroxidase antibodies, and thyroglobulin antibodies. It would be wonderful if you also test your adrenals and full iron panel and your nutrient deficiencies, and I could go on and on.
Yes.
But for now, let's talk about the thyroid panel. I think you need to be as thyroid healthy as possible, and that you wait until your body feels, you said it, you know your body better than anybody. And if your body is suffering symptoms and you don't feel right, you're not right. Doesn't matter what those lab tests say, and you need a doctor that's listening to you. So I think the first is you have to be as healthy as possible. The second is I think you need to have a pregnancy plan with your doctor. You need to agree with your doctor that they give you a lab requisition form for your thyroid testing so that the day you find out you're pregnant, you have it ready and you go and you get it done. You also have to have the pregnancy tests ready so that you're testing as soon as you start trying to conceive. You're not waiting till a missed cycle. You know, that's already 5 weeks, 6 weeks. Like, no, you're not waiting that long. You're, 2 weeks. I tested myself by 3 weeks. I was done. I was in for thyroid testing. My TSH had already skyrocketed. Had I waited for 5 weeks or even my OBGYN appointment at 8 weeks, come on, Mark.
Right.
You know, the reality is my son wouldn't be here today if I had waited that long. So that's another important thing. The third thing that's really important is I think that doctors are not aware that the American Thyroid Association recommends a TSH less than 2.5. For women, for hypothyroid women trying to conceive, you are to have a TSH less than 2.5. Now, everywhere that I have read, they recommend for pregnancy 1 to 2. Now this is something that's very individual, though, because I have a suppressed TSH on natural desiccated thyroid, so it's lower than normal. I don't have hyperthyroid symptoms. I have my free T4 and free T3 are great. I have suppressed TSH. So again, it's about a doctor listening to you and what's right for you and your body. And I think the fourth and the most important thing is you listen to your body. If you have Hashimoto's, you could be swinging hypo and hyper. So, it's just as dangerous to be hyper as it is to be hypo. So you want to know what are the symptoms of hypothyroidism, what are the symptoms of hyperthyroidism, and pay attention to your body. What does it feel like when you are, your meds are not right? What does that feel like? So that you say to your doctor, no, I'm not okay. And I know you scheduled me to see me in 4 weeks, but I'm not waiting 4 weeks.
Right.
Because my TSH rose. I went in at 4 weeks and I had a certain dosage. At about 1.5 weeks after that appointment, I wasn't feeling well. The fatigue started dropping on me. My heels were all cracked. The hair was falling out. And I called her up and I said, listen, I'm not waiting 4 weeks. And she increased my dosage and had me in for thyroid testing. Guess what? My TSH had already risen within a week and a half that I had been to see her. So you see, you've got to know your body. You've got to know what it feels like when you're hypo and hyper.
Right. Yeah, I mean, fantastic. Right, 4 very important issues. And what I'm hearing, too, is just that first trimester is so critically important.
So critical.
That you really need to make sure you are as healthy as possible before you try and conceive.
And one thing to be watching out for, which I don't read a lot about, but I think it's something to be aware of, morning sickness. Now, morning sickness is a normal thing in pregnancy in the first trimester. So, the kind of morning sickness I'm talking about is something where you feel ill inside your body. Okay, so I felt like there were poisons in my body. I don't know how to explain it, but that I felt toxic.
Yeah.
And so the pregnancy that I miscarried, I felt toxic and I miscarried. My pregnancy with my second son, I felt that toxicity. No matter what morning sickness remedies I did acupuncture for morning sickness, nothing was working. Well, guess what? It was because my TSH was rising. When she treated my TSH and increased my dosage, my morning sickness went away, Mark.
Interesting.
So, you got to listen it. If something inside you doesn't feel right, it's not right.
Right. Yeah, another perfect example. Listen to your body. Trust your instincts. Wow, awesome stuff, Dana. Okay, we're going to take a little break, people. This is part 2 of my conversation with Dana Trentini of Hypothyroidmom. We'll be back. We're going to be answering some of your questions.
Hashimoto'sHealing.com